Hello again. This is our second lecture. In this lecture, you will be introduced to kingdom fungi and kingdom plantae. For a start, we're going to watch this video on kingdom fungi. Enjoy!
We may not know it, but fungi live all around us. Fungi are organisms that live on organic matter and are as commonplace inside as they are outside. Molds are microscopic fungi. They live in the air we breathe, in our refrigerators, in the shower, practically everywhere. There are even fungi living in your toothbrush right now. But molds and fungi aren't all bad. Many are beneficial, some even tasty. Mushrooms are fungi, and some of our favorite cheeses could not exist without fungi. If it weren't for yeast, a unicellular fungus, bread wouldn't rise. But leave food out too long and the fungi take over. Much the same way a fungus absorbs this pizza, it kills bacteria. In fact, a fungus was responsible for the first modern bacterial antibiotic. Penicillium notatum was first isolated in England in 1929. The story goes that a British researcher, Alexander Fleming, accidentally allowed a fungus to develop on a bacteria-covered petri dish. He soon noticed that the fungus prevented the bacteria from growing. It secretes a substance, penicillin, that kills bacteria. Over the next few years, penicillin saved the lives of thousands of soldiers injured in World War II. Penicillin quickly became a miracle drug. Before its discovery, a person could die from the smallest cut or scrape. With antibiotics, doctors finally had the tools to ward off infections. Dr. Stanley Falco explains.
In the 40s, when antibiotics really came into general use, there was such a kind of high that developed because we were taking things like streptococcal blood poisoning and pneumonias, gonorrhea, syphilis, and all of these things were being cured. It was a miracle.
Fungi are part of our world. Some are harmful, but some have the power to save lives.
This is subtopic 1.5, domain Eukarya, kingdom fungi. The learning outcomes for these subtopics are: state the unique characteristics of fungi, state the classification of fungi phyla based on the spore-bearing structure. So we have the Zygomycota, the example is Rhizopus species. We have the Ascomycota, the example is Penicillium species. And we have the Basidiomycota, the example is Agaricus species. And also, we are needed to state the importance of fungi. The unique characteristics of fungi are: they are eukaryotic, they do not contain chlorophyll, therefore they are non-photosynthetic. They store food energy as glycogen. Most of them are saprophytic, that means they live on other dead organisms. In order to absorb nutrients, they have become the absorptive heterotrophs. That means they release digestive enzymes to break down organic material of their host and then absorb into their bodies. Fungi are also heterotrophic. That means they can be parasitic, saprophytic, or mutualist. Fungi are important decomposers and recyclers of nutrients in the environment. Most are multicellular, but some are unicellular, like yeast. The major constituents of the fungal cell wall are chitin, glucans, and glycoproteins. Fungi reproduce both asexually and sexually. Kingdom fungi is divided into three phyla, namely phylum Zygomycota, phylum Ascomycota, and phylum Basidiomycota. The examples for phylum Zygomycota is Rhizopus species, phylum Ascomycota is Penicillium species, phylum Basidiomycota is Agaricus species. Each of the phylum is classified based on the spore-bearing structure. Phylum Zygomycota. The spore-bearing structure for this phylum is called as zygosporangium. The zygosporangium contains zygospores that formed by sexual reproduction. Phylum Ascomycota. Generally, the fruiting body for this phylum is called as ascocarps. The ascocarps contain the spore-bearing structure that is called as asci, singular ascus, and the ascus contains ascospores. As for Penicillium species, they reproduce asexually by producing enormous numbers of asexual spores called conidia. Conidia are produced externally at the tips of specialized hyphae called conidiophore. Phylum Basidiomycota is a large and diverse phylum and most advanced fungi. The example for this phylum Basidiomycota is Agaricus species, local names mushrooms. It is a filamentous fungi that compose of hyphae. Basidia are borne on fruiting body, also known as basidiocarps, which are large and conspicuous. These are the importance of fungi. Decomposer. Fungi are saprophytic. They feed on dead and decaying organisms. On the other hand, they help to recycle nutrients such as phosphates, ammonia, and sulfates. Symbionts. The example is lichens. This is a mixture of fungi and algae. Algae photosynthesize and provide organic food. Fungus receive food in exchange for housing, water, and minerals. They commonly encrusted on rocks and tree trunks. Pathogen. Some of fungi species are parasites, mostly of plants, and these cause huge economic effects. Commercial importance in food production. For example, yeast. They produce alcoholic beverages and rise up bread dough. Pharmaceutical. The example is penicillin. Fungi is used as antibiotics. They process from Penicillium species that kills or stops the growth of certain kinds of bacteria inside the body. Now we have come to the thought questions. You find a moldy orange in your produce bin in your kitchen cupboard. What characteristics of this environment, consider both the orange and your kitchen, contributed to the growth of this mold? Could a plant not have grown in this cupboard? Hey, have a quick thought on this and then you can check them with your teacher. Next subtopic is kingdom plantae under the domain Eukarya. This is 1.6 domain Eukarya, kingdom plantae, and the learning outcomes are: describe alternation of generation as the unique characteristics of plantae, and state the classification of plantae into 4 groups. They are Bryophytes, Pteridophytes, Gymnosperms, and Angiosperms. The alternation of generation as the unique characteristics of plantae. Alternation of generation is a type of life cycle found in terrestrial plants and some algae in which subsequent generations of individuals alternate between haploid and diploid organisms. In general, the generations alternate between the sporophytes that capable of creating spores, gametophytes that capable of creating gametes. As for the sporophyte, to form a sporophyte, 2 haploid gametes come together to form a diploid zygote, that is 2N. When the sporophyte reaches maturity, a key point in the alternation of generation takes place. The sporophyte develops organs, known as sporangia, to produce haplot spores. These spores will be released into the air or water and carried away. When they reach a suitable environment, they will begin the process of developing into the gametophyte. And as for the gametophyte, it represents the next generation in the alternation of generations as the haploid spore is created. This spore will undergo successive rounds of mitosis to form a new multicellular individual, that is the gametophyte. Where the sporophyte generation creates spores, the gametophyte generation creates gametes that produced by gametangia. These gametes are then broadcast into the environment or transferred between plants. When they find an opposite gamete, they begin the process of fusing to form another zygote. This zygote will and eventually become a sporophyte, and the alternation of generations will keep turning reproductive cycles to define the species. Basically, kingdom Plantae can be divided into two groups, non-vascular and vascular. As for the non-vascular, the plant is lack of vascular tissue, that means it has no xylem and phloem. It is in leafy or thalloid appearance, therefore it has no true roots, stems and leaves. But as for the vascular, the plants have vascular tissue that transport water and nutrients. That means it has xylem that transport water and phloem that transport dissolved substances. Based on this classification, kingdom Plantae can be grouped into four. They are Bryophytes, Pteridophytes, Gymnosperms and Angiosperms. The first major groups of kingdom Plantae is Bryophytes. Subtopic 1.6.1 Bryophytes, and the learning outcomes for this subtopic is that you need to describe the unique characteristics of Bryophytes, state the classification of Bryophytes into three phyla, that is the phylum Hepatophyta, phylum Bryophyta, and phylum Entocerophyta. And also you are needed to state the terrestrial adaptation for Bryophytes. The Bryophytes are unique due to their characteristics, as they are the simplest group of land plants. They live in damp and shady places. They are restricted in size, which they are very small, let's say 1 to 2 cm in height. This is to make sure that all cells could obtain enough nutrients. They are also non-vascular plants, so they are lack of specialized vascular tissues. So how do they live? They rely on diffusion and osmosis, and the whole surface of the plant can absorb needed nutrients. In the alternation of generation, it shows that the gametophyte is dominant, whereby male gametophyte is at the entridia singular called entridium, and the female gametophyte is at the archegonium singular archegonium. As for the sporophyte, they attach and dependent upon the gametophyte for the nutrition. They are smaller and shorter-lived. Among the sporophytes in kingdom Plantae, the Bryophytes are the smallest and the simplest sporophytes. The Bryophytes are then grouped into three phyla. Firstly, phylum Hepatophyta. The example is Marchantia species. The common name for this phylum is liverworts, which refer to the liver-shaped gametophytes. The gametophyte is in flattened shape, also can be called as thalloid. In the life cycle of phylum Hepatophyta, gametangia elevated on gametophore, and the sporophytes have a short seta with an oval capsule. Next is the phylum Bryophyta. The example is Polytrichum species. They are consist of mainly gametophytes. The sporophytes are elongated and visible. The cells of the sporophytes contain plastid. They are usually green and photosynthetic when they are young, that is green, and turn tan when ready to release spores. A sporophyte consists of a food, a seta, and a sporangium. The food that is embedded in the archegonium absorbs nutrient from the gametophyte. The capsule produces spores by meiosis. Lastly is phylum Entocerophyta. The example is Entocero species. This phylum refers to the long tapered shape of sporophyte. The sporophyte is lack of seta and consists only a sporangium. The sporangium releases mature spores by splitting open starting at the tip of the horn. There are three terrestrial adaptations of bryophytes. Firstly, drying out. A sterile jacket developed around Antheridia and Archegonia which prevent them from drying out. Secondly, reproduction. Delicate sex cells must be protected by gametangium. Thirdly, is the gaseous exchange. The presence of stomata facilitate the movement of gases such as carbon dioxide and oxygen in and out through the cuticle. The next subtopic is the next major group in kingdom Plantae, that is Pteridophytes. So the learning outcomes that need to be achieved in this subtopic is to describe the unique characteristics of Pteridophytes, state the classification of Pteridophytes into two phyla, that is the phylum Lycopodiophyta. The examples are Lycopodium species and Selaginella species. And secondly is the phylum Pteridophyta. The example is Bryophytes species. The pteridophyte is a vascular plant. Therefore, the unique characteristics are, firstly, it has true roots, stems, and leaves, and it is lignified vascular tissues, and the xylem has tracheids and sieve tubes. This is only for transport and support system. Secondly, this plant is a non-flowering plant, therefore it is seedless. So, they produce spores, and there are two types of spores, that is homosporous and heterosporous. Homosporous refers to the plants that producing only one type of spores. Meanwhile, heterosporous is the plant that producing megaspores and microspores. Thirdly, this plant is a photosynthetic, which means they can make their own food, and the sporophyte is dominant and easily visible. Therefore, in the alternation of generation, mature sporophyte, that is 2N, undergoes meiosis and produces spores. Spore grows into gametophyte. Each gametophyte develops sperm-producing organs that we call as antheridia, and egg-producing organs that we call as archegonia. The sperm use flagella to swim to the eggs in the archegonia and fertilize. A zygote develops into a new sporophyte, and the young plant grows out from an archegonium of its parents, the gametophyte. The details and narrative of this can be shown in the next video.
Being close to the soil, the small gametophytes are easily flooded when it rains. This water plays an important role in fertilization. Water stimulates the cap cell on the antheridion to open, releasing the sperm cells. The flagellated sperm are now able to move within the water in search of an egg. Sperm consist of a spiral cell body bearing numerous flagella that move it forward. Water also stimulates the archegonium to open. The contents of the neck canal then diffuse into the surrounding water, where they act as a sperm attractant. The attractant stimulates a sperm to swim towards the open archegonium. It then swims into the opening and moves up the neck canal towards the egg cell. Fertilization is accomplished when the egg and sperm nuclei fuse. This creates a single diploid cell, the zygote. fertilized egg remains attached to the gametophyte. Inside the archegonium on the lower surface of the gametophyte, the zygote begins to divide, forming the embryo's sporophyte plant. The uppermost part of the embryo, the foot, absorbs nutrients from the surrounding gametophyte tissue. As the embryo grows, the venter tissue stretches and eventually ruptures. A root now grows into the soil for support and to absorb water. Other parts of the embryo form the first leaf and the future stem, the rhizome. The leaf grows through the notch in the gametophyte to reach the sunlight. Eventually the rhizome emerges and provides additional leaves and roots. In this way, a new plant is formed that matures into another spore-producing fern, completing the reproductive cycle. We have seen that the fern reproductive cycle contains two plants, the large familiar spore plant or sporophyte, and a tiny gamete plant or gametophyte. Using spores to travel great distances and gametes which introduce genetic variability, ferns have spread and evolved throughout the world.
The Pteridophytes can be classified into two phyla. The first phylum is Lycopodiophyta. The examples for phylum Lycopodiophyta is Lycopodium species and Selaginella species. The second phylum is phylum Pteridophyta. The example is Bryophytes species. Now we have come to the third major group in kingdom Plantae, Gymnosperms. The learning outcomes for this subtopic describe the unique characteristics of Gymnosperms, state the classification of Gymnosperms into four divisions. Cycadophyta, the example is Cycas species. Pinophyta, the example is Pinus species. Ginkgophyta, the example is Ginkgo species. And Gnatophyta, the example is Gnathum species. The unique characteristics of Gymnosperms: they have true roots, leaves and stems, meaning they have vascular tissues, but somehow the xylem has trachea only and the phloem are present with no companion cells. And if they have vascular cambium, the vascular leads to the secondary growth that become wood. Secondly, this plant is a non-flowering plant. Therefore, they have naked seeds, and these naked seeds are exposed on the surface of spore that producing structures called sporophylls. These spores are usually heterosporous. That means they are microspores and megaspores. The spores are kept in a reproductive organs that are usually bare in cones. The sporophylls are spirally arranged, so there will be no double fertilization. Anyhow, the ovules are modified from megasporangium that contain the female gametophyte. In the alternation of generations, the sporophyte is a dominant, meanwhile the gametophyte very much reduced. It depends entirely on the sporophyte. The classification of the Gymnosperms can be grouped into division Cycadophyta, division Pinophyta, division Ginkgophyta, and last one is division Gnatophyta. The Gymnosperms can be identified from their cones or strobili. The cones or strobili contains the spore. Each of the female and male cones are different, such as the division Cycadophyta, division Pinophyta, division Ginkgophyta, and division Gnatophyta. All of them have different shape of male and female strobilus. Now we have come to the last group of kingdom Plantae. Subtopic 1.6.5 Angiosperms. The learning outcomes for these subtopics is to describe the unique characteristics of angiosperms, that is, the division of phylum Phyla. The following are the unique characteristics of angiosperms. The angiosperms are flowering plants. They produce flowers and fruits. The fruits have seed, and this plant is called as seed plants. The seeds are enclosed in fruit. Secondly, they have true roots, stems, and leaves. Therefore, they have a complete vascular tissue with xylem and phloem. In xylem, it consists of trachea and vessel elements as well as fiber cells for support. This xylem is efficient for water transport. In the phloem, it consists of sieve tubes and companion cells. In the alternation of generation, the sporophyte is dominant and play a role as the plant body. Meanwhile, in gametophyte, it is very much reduced. The male gametophyte is called as pollen grains and the female gametophyte is called as embryo sac. Most of the angiosperms are in division Entophyta. They have male and female reproductive parts. Therefore, they reproduce asexually and sexually. Asexually by vegetative propagation or producing heterosporous. Sexually, usually the reproduction involves double fertilization. The evolutionary relationships among groups in the plant kingdom are based on the size, dominance of gametophytes and sporophytes, dependence of gametophyte and sporophytes, water dependence in fertilization, presence of vascular tissues, and embryo protection. You may want to have a thought on this question. Describe alternation of generations. Include in your discussion the following terms: gametophyte, sporophyte, diploid, haploid, dominant form, meiosis, and fertilization. Just take a piece of paper, answer the question in a visual form, and check with your teacher. We have come to the end of this lecture. For the next lecture, it will be on Kingdom Animalia. Know your animals and have fun knowing them. Thank you for watching this lecture. Take care and bye-bye.